Welcome to Module 4. My name is Caitlin Young with Trillium Family Services. In this module, we'll engage with themes and tools related to the physiology of stress and emotions and flexible self-care. This module is sandwiched right in the middle of the workshop series by design. So often when self-care is mentioned in a training, it's right at the end as we're running out of time. Are you wondering why we've dedicated an entire session to the topic of you, the self, that you bring to work with you? Well, as we've referenced in modules 1, 2, and 3, trauma-informed care is very much about workforce wellness and this idea of parallel process. If we have overstressed helpers helping overstressed service users embedded within overstressed systems, well, that's a lot of stress. With that said, please take good care of yourselves as we move through this material and do whatever you need to do. Maybe you have a fidget toy, a hydrating beverage, a pleasant image to look at. You're always encouraged to take a break whenever you need. Here's a brief overview of this session. We'll start with a mindful moment, then we'll do our Module 4 lecture, and we'll begin with some definitions of burnout, compassion fatigue, and vicarious trauma, then zoom a bit deeper into how emotions and stress are connected. Then we'll introduce an assessment and tool on the topics of burnout and self-care. Our mindful moment for today is called square breathing. Square breathing, also referred to as four-square breathing, is a breathing technique that helps you feel invigorated, energized, and focused. It can also help to reduce stress and invite feelings of calmness and tranquility into your mind and your body. Research shows that 1.5 minutes of paced breathing can help your nervous system process stored emotions and stress. So this is an invitation. Please join in or use this next 1.5 minutes to restore yourself in some other way. For this exercise, you breathe in for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4, hold the exhale for a count of 4, and repeat. So let's begin. Plant your feet on the floor, find some length through your spine, and float your eyes closed if you like. So breathing in for a count of 4, holding, breathing out, holding. Please continue. You can follow the prompter or your own breath. Helpers are susceptible to burnout, compassion fatigue, and secondary traumatic stress. It's important to recognize that some sources link these experiences as the same, and while they are interrelated and often have similar symptoms, understanding their distinctiveness can be key to identifying and proposing solutions to address them. We'll start with burnout. Anyone can experience burnout. This definition comes from Herbert Freudenberger in the 1970s. Burnout refers to a state of physical, mental, or emotional exhaustion caused by excessive or prolonged stress. It can lead to a sense of reduced accomplishment and loss of personal identity. He moves on to describe 3 components of burnout: First, emotional exhaustion, the fatigue that comes from caring too much for too long. Second, depersonalization, the depletion of empathy, caring, and compassion. Third, decreased sense of accomplishment, the feeling that nothing you do makes any difference. We'll revisit the emotional exhaustion component in more depth in just a moment. Next, compassion fatigue. This is more specific to those in helping or caregiving roles. Compassion fatigue refers to the physical and mental exhaustion and emotional withdrawal experienced over an extended period of time by helpers. It can lead to apathy or indifference toward the suffering of others. Exposure to people who've experienced trauma can have both positive and negative impacts. On the positive side, many people gain a sense of personal satisfaction from their work. Many of us also feel a strong sense of empathy for those with whom we work and can take on the feelings, symptoms, or behaviors of those in our care. In contrast, compassion satisfaction is the fulfillment experienced from helping others. And then there's secondary traumatic stress. This can occur when a professional experiences high stress or symptoms of trauma that mimic post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms when working with people who've experienced trauma. So let's talk about some of the signs, the risk, and protective factors of vicarious traumatization. Here are some individual factors that can make workers more vulnerable to the effects of this exposure. A past history of trauma, overwork, poor respect for boundaries, too high a caseload of trauma survivors, newer to the field or less experience, too much exposure, repetitive negative outcomes. What other risk factors can you think of? Here are some factors that help protect against vicarious trauma. The best and most effective factor against vicarious trauma is social support by colleagues, family members, friends, and loved ones. Supervision and consultation, engaging in personal healing work, strong ethical principles of practice, knowledge of trauma theory, ongoing training, competence in practice strategies, awareness of the potential and impact of vicarious traumatization. What else can you think of? Now we're going to talk about emotional exhaustion and completing the stress cycle. In 2020, doctors and twin sisters Emily and Amelia Nagoski published a book called Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. The book explains why we experience burnout and provides a simple, science-based plan to help minimize stress, manage emotions, and live a more joyful life. This next segment of our session is based on this book and the work of the Nagoski sisters. Let's quickly flash back to the 3 elements of burnout. So first, emotional exhaustion. That's the fatigue that comes from caring too much for too long. Second, depersonalization, the depletion of empathy, caring, and compassion. Third, decreased sense of accomplishment, the feeling that nothing you do makes any difference. So the Nagoski sisters say in the 40 years since the original formulation, research has found that it's the first element in burnout, that emotional exhaustion, that's the most strongly linked to negative impacts on our health, on relationships, and on work. So let's talk about emotional exhaustion, and let's talk about feelings. What is emotion? Is it a real thing? Yes, emotions are real. In Burnout, the book, it goes into detail and explains that emotions are cycles that happen in your body. They're neurological events that happen in your brain and in your entire nervous system. Emotions are involuntary neurological responses, like breathing or your heart beating. Emotions have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Emotions automatic, instantaneous, and it affects every system in your body. Here's an example of how stress can impact the cardiovascular system. So when we stay in the state of chronically elevated stress for hours, days, weeks, months, years at a time, this causes wear and tear on our blood vessels, which causes weakness in places for plaques to develop. And this is how stress causes heart disease. It can be any system though. It could be the endocrine system, the digestive system. So the Nagoski sisters write, feelings are tunnels. You have to go all the way through them to get to the light at the end. And exhaustion happens when we get stuck in an emotion. Okay, so they move on to outline 3 reasons that we get stuck in our stress cycles. The The first is chronic stressor or chronic stress. So let's say we find a thing that helps us move through the stress cycle. Maybe it's taking a walk. And this helps us complete our stress cycles over and over, day after day. However, if our stress levels outpace the resources we have available to drain off that stress, it will keep accumulating. The second reason we get stuck in our stress cycle is social appropriateness. We're socially conditioned, especially helpers, to be nice and save our big feelings for when we get home. So sometimes, maybe even often, we're not able to see our emotion all the way through because it's not appropriate. Can you think of an example of this? It may look like being mistreated by a patron in the workplace, or talked down to by a supervisor, or experiencing a microaggression. So maybe it's not perceived as acceptable to tell your supervisor that what they've said makes you angry or stressed, and then you carry that unfinished cycle with you. The third is safety. This is a biggie. If we have a big reaction, and if we have a big feeling, is it physically safe to see this feeling through? So here's an example from the book of an interaction on the street where a man catcalls out to a woman. I'd like to acknowledge the gender binary in this example, and this example is one many have likely observed or experienced. So the woman's natural instinct in this example may be to fight and yell at this guy. However, she assesses her personal safety and decides that could escalate the situation, so she says nothing and keeps walking. Stored stress. This information about the phases of emotion and completing the stress cycle is emergent. One thing I really appreciate about the Burnout book and research provided within it is that they take time to lay the foundation, define the problem of burnout, provide research and statistics, and then provide some tangible actions that can be taken or practiced to support the completion of your stress cycles. So here are a list of 6 of the most effective ways to complete the stress cycle. The first is physical activity, literally any movement of your body. The second, breathing, which downregulates your nervous system. It's the highest evidence-based way to complete the stress cycle. Third is laughter, not social or posed laughter, but genuine, uncontrolled belly laughter. The fourth is a 20-second hug, or hugging till relaxed. So in a safe, trusting context, each of you holding yourselves up, you breathe together until you feel the shift in your chemistry. Fifth is crying, let it out, but try to set the thoughts that associate the reason for the big feeling aside, because thoughts can feed or flood the crying further. So aim to focus on the physical sensations of the crying, the wet tears, the snotty nose. Creative expression. 6, whatever is inside you, take it and put it outside of you. This could be imagination, it could be painting, sculpting, dancing, cooking a meal. In the book, one sister shares an example of hopping on the treadmill and imagining she's a gorilla tromping through the jungle. That's activity and imagination. So they write, don't worry if you're not sure you can recognize when you've completed the cycle, especially if you've spent a lot of years or your whole life holding on to worry or anger. You've probably got a whole lot of accumulated stress response cycles spinning their engines, waiting for their turn. So it's going to take a while before you get through the backlog. All you need to do is realize that you feel incrementally better than you felt before you started. And as we discussed in Module 1, stress is a natural and healthy response. So having tools in our tool belt to help us complete our stress cycles is also natural and healthy. The Burnout book shares that to be well is not to live in a state of perpetual safety and calm, but to move fluidly from a state of adversity, risk, adventure, or excitement back to safety and calm, and out again. Stress is not bad for you, but being stuck is bad for you. So part of workforce wellness from a trauma-informed systems perspective is about creating a culture where we acknowledge that we all have feelings and stress, and that we all have different practices to move stress through our nervous systems. These practices to move stress through our nervous systems can be and have been referred to as self-care. So let's talk about self-care, beginning with some candid unpacking of the stigma of self-care. Telling someone that they need to practice self-care can have a myriad of responses. For some, it could be helpful or validating. For many, though, it can be a roadblock or even a trigger. So here are some examples of roadblocks or triggers that I've encountered in the workplace. The first is a belief that self-care is selfish. This could be based in culture, gender, or other social norms that feed this idea, and this can understandably turn some away from the self-care concept. 2, self-care is a privilege. We do not all have the resources of time, social support, or money to practice self-care. To have a very stressful workday or work life or career and then come home to a safe home and enjoy a stroll in the neighborhood, a nice meal, maybe a funny TV show, some peace and quiet, it's certainly not something that's available to all. To have the resources to take time away and recharge in nature or get a massage, for example, requires the money to afford things like extra childcare or other non-essential wellness benefits like a gym membership. 3rd, self-care is just another thing on my already too long to-do list. Who needs that, right? If you have a really stressful work-related crisis and in your debrief session, your supervisor says, now you should practice some self-care. And you're like, great, okay, when? I work 60 hours a week. 4th, not doing self-care becomes a trigger for feelings of guilt or shame. It feeds into a cycle of guilt or being harder on ourselves. And this is totally related to another thing on the to-do list. The way we talk about ourselves and about our self-care is really important. And we're going to talk more about this at the end of the session today. So if the script in your mind is saying, Caitlin, you've let yourself down again. You didn't do your self-care thing. Look what you're eating for dinner. Have you even moved off the couch since you got home? What are some other stigmas or roadblocks related to self-care that come to mind for you? Jot them down, share them. All of these are valid and real experiences, and the science is there. Our bodies know we are meant to move through our full emotional cycles, and we do not have to be responsible for this on our own. I think this is a collective culture shift. So one final gem from the Nagoski sisters is about the relational aspect of wellness. The cure for burnout isn't and can't be self-care. It has to be all of us caring for each other. They write, self-care is the fallout shelter you built in your basement because it's your job to protect yourself. We talk about sleep, about physical activity, but what if it's not just your job to protect yourself? Self-care requires a bubble of protection of other people who value your well-being at least as highly as you do. So the cure for burnout, they say, must ultimately be all of us caring for each other. We lean on, we pick each other up, we practice self-compassion along the way. Now we're going to talk about and spend some time developing a personal wellness plan. The self-care plan is a tool that was developed by Dr. Sandra Bloom as part of the Sanctuary model of trauma-informed care. It provides guidance for using time away from work to intentionally recharge and replenish our energy and inspiration. Dr. Bloom continues to refine this tool, and it's been renamed and adapted a personal wellness plan. Wellness plans are ideally practiced regularly and proactively rather than as an in-the-moment coping strategy. The wellness plan identifies 5 components of self-care: physical, psychological, social, moral or spiritual, and professional. Physical components are things like exercising, sleep hygiene, or getting a massage. Psychological components are things like attending therapy, setting good boundaries, engaging in things that inspire and renew your sense of self. Social components like spending time with family, friends, pets. Moral and spiritual components are things like taking time to nurture your religious or philosophical convictions, your philosophical study, meditation, time in nature, reminding yourself of the meaning and purpose of life. Professional components like taking breaks during the workday, setting small, reasonable goals. So let's pause, take 3 minutes for some personal reflection. Can you think of 1 or 2 meaningful activities for each realm? So earlier in the lecture, we reviewed some risk factors and signs of vicarious trauma. One thing about stress and burnout is that sometimes when you're deep in it, it can be impossible to recognize. This is another reason we need to look to others for support. So now we'll introduce the Professional Quality of Life Scale, or ProQual. It's an instrument used to measure compassion fatigue or burnout, as well as satisfaction and secondary trauma. This tool can help us gauge our own level of burnout, including our own exposure to trauma, both work and non-work related. This is a tool that can be used to pause and take account of your current level of burnout. It can be used at different points in time to measure changes. It was developed in 2009 and consists of 30 thoughtful questions. After answering all the questions, you can self-score and receive a number value for compassion satisfaction, which is the pleasure you derive from being able to do your work well, burnout, and secondary traumatic stress. I'll share a PDF of this scale along with the slides and resources at the end of the lecture, and you're encouraged to take it and use it. The final segment of this session will focus on some psychological aspects of personal wellness. Research shows us that perspective matters. The things we focus on multiply. The words we use to describe the people we work with and our own experiences of stress matter. These are 3 psychological processes we can practice that are scientifically supported in the navigation of overwhelm and stress. So the first is cognitive reframing. When facing potential stressors, the way we view what we're experiencing can greatly increase our stress or minimize it. Cognitive reframing is a time-honored, psychologist-recommended method of looking at things in ways that create less stress and promote a greater sense of peace and control. One of my favorite reframes when it comes to burnout is, instead of closing your workday by replaying all the things in your mind you were not able to complete, share out loud or in writing one thing or some of the things that you did complete. Next is gratitude. Gratitude lowers hormones of stress like cortisol and adrenaline in the body and minimizes caregiving stress. So punctuating your gratitude out loud in writing or thinking gratitudes to yourself are all powerful practices. Your gratitudes can be small or large. Next, self-compassion. This involves directing the same kind of care, kindness, and compassion toward yourself that you conveyed toward loved ones who are suffering. So self-compassion involves being open to and moved by one's own suffering and recognizes that one's experience is part of the common human experience. Treating yourself kindly when things go wrong. Treating yourself kindly can be an overt action, like taking time off work, or internal, like engaging in self-talk that's positive. Another aspect of self-compassion involves taking a balanced perspective of one's situation. So people who are low in self-compassion tend to dwell on negativity of the situation. And mindfulness is a core component of self-compassion. A simple practice of self-compassion could look like asking yourself, if my best friend was having the experience I'm having right now, how would I respond? One component of self-compassion is related to kindness and curiosity, and another is related to action. I'd be remiss if I did not mention self-compassion can be active. Sometimes the toll of our work or the stress in our relationships or lives demands that we take action and make changes. So finding a new job, leaving an unhealthy relationship, these things are not easy. Once in a professional retreat of trauma therapists, we went around the group and shared what our plan Bs were. So the prompt was, if I were not doing the work I'm doing, I would ... Just this perspective shift can lift a mental load. Being trauma-informed is about having choices and making choices when we're able. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Please take good care of yourselves and one another.